When General David Petraeus, one of America's most respected military minds, declared that there's never been anything like Trump's military purge, it was not simply a headline to shock the world. It was a warning, a statement drawn from decades of service, and an acknowledgement that something extraordinary, something deeply unsettling, was unfolding in the corridors of American power. For generations, the United States military has prided itself on being apolitical, professional, and guided by a higher duty, the defense of the Constitution, not the service of a single man. Yet, under Donald Trump's presidency, we witnessed a shift so radical that Petraeus himself, a man who has seen wars, uprisings, and political turmoil across continents, felt compelled to say, "There's never been anything like this. Why unprecedented?" Because the United States, unlike many nations, has always understood the dangerous consequences when the armed forces become pawns in political games. The military was not built to serve the ego of a leader or to protect one man's grip on power. It was built to defend the Republic, to stand guard over freedoms, and to remain steadfast in its oath to the Constitution. But what happened during Trump's time in office was a series of purges, replacements, and demands for loyalty that shook the very core of this principle. Senior officers, lifelong servants of the nation, suddenly found themselves dismissed not for failure in battle, not for dereliction of duty, but for the simple crime of disagreeing with a president, or refusing to bow to his personal will. This has never been the American way. Presidents may have disagreed with Generals Lincoln with McClellan, Truman with MacArthur, Obama with McChrystal, but those disagreements, as heated as they were, took place in the context of strategy, policy, and national interest. What we saw under Trump was different. It was not a clash of ideas, it was a clash of loyalty. He valued not competence, not independence of thought, but obedience to him personally, and when obedience was questioned, purges followed. General Petraeus, who has commanded troops in Iraq and Afghanistan, who understands the delicate relationship between civilian leadership and military command, recognized immediately that this was a path toward dangerous territory. The phrase "there's never been anything like this" carries weight because Petraeus is not prone to exaggeration. For him, it was a recognition that the very fabric of civil-military relations, a cornerstone of American democracy, was being shredded before our eyes. Think about the implications. A military officer forced to choose between professional duty and political loyalty. A Pentagon reshaped not to serve the nation, but to reflect one man's vision of control. Senior officials removed overnight, replaced with loyalists who may not have had the same depth of experience, but who had one qualification that mattered most: fealty to Donald Trump. This was not merely personnel change. This was a systematic effort to reshape the military in a president's image, something that echoes the practices of strongmen, not the traditions of the United States. And so, when Petraeus raised the alarm, he was reminding the nation of its own history. Never before had America's armed forces faced such direct political pressure to conform. Never before had the Pentagon been so closely scrutinized for its loyalty to a single man, rather than its loyalty to the Constitution. It was a moment of reckoning, a warning siren blaring for all who still believed that American democracy was immune to such authoritarian temptations. To call this purge unprecedented is to acknowledge that it crossed boundaries no president had crossed before. It is to recognize that the stakes were not just about who sat in a chair at the Department of Defense, but about whether the principle of an apolitical military would survive intact. For Petraeus and for countless veterans and patriots, this was not politics. It was survival of the very system of governance that has kept America strong. So when we say there's never been anything like Trump's military purge, let us understand it not as a casual statement, but as a profound truth. It is the opening chapter of a story that demands our full attention, for in this unprecedented moment, we must ask, what does it mean for the future of America when even its most trusted institution, the military, becomes entangled in the politics of one man? To truly grasp the gravity of what General Petraeus meant when he declared that there's never been anything like Trump's military purge, we must step back and understand the unique and sacred role the United States military plays in American democracy. Unlike many nations where armies have historically been tools of dictators or instruments of coups, America's military has always drawn its power not from a political party or a president, but from a solemn oath, an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. This distinction is critical. The American system of government rests on the delicate balance between civilian authority and military strength. Civilian leaders set policy, define objectives, and decide when and where wars are fought. The military, in turn, carries out those missions with discipline, professionalism, and expertise. But the unwritten contract between these two pillars is that the military must remain nonpartisan, insulated from politics, and committed to serving the Republic rather than the personal interests of whoever occupies the Oval Office. The Founding Fathers themselves understood this. Having lived under the tyranny of a king and witnessed the dangers of standing armies controlled by rulers, they placed extraordinary emphasis on keeping the military subordinate to civilian authority while ensuring it was never captured by political whims. George Washington, himself a general before becoming the first president, warned against the military becoming a partisan tool. That principle, civilian control, coupled with military neutrality, has been a defining hallmark of American stability for more than 2 centuries. This is why the military has long been one of the most respected institutions in America. Regardless of whether a Republican or Democrat sits in the White House, the American people have trusted their armed forces because they know soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines serve the Constitution, not the ambitions of a single individual. When citizens salute the flag, when they thank veterans for their service, it is not just gratitude for bravery in battle. It is recognition of a deeper covenant that those who wear the uniform are guardians of the Republic, not instruments of political power. Now imagine what happens when this sacred neutrality is threatened. Imagine what it means if officers begin to wonder whether their careers depend not on their performance, but on their loyalty to the personality of a president. That is precisely the danger Petraeus was pointing to. If the military bends to political loyalty, it ceases to be the people's military and instead becomes a ruler's military. The line between democracy and authoritarianism is not crossed all at once. It erodes step by step. And the politicization of the military is one of the gravest steps on that path. History shows us the risks. In nations where the armed forces become partisan, democracy collapses. We see it in countries where leaders use generals to cement power, silence dissent, and undermine institutions. America has long stood apart from such practices, but Trump's purge raised the specter that even the most durable democracy is not immune. By demanding personal loyalty, by removing those who questioned his directives, he blurred the boundary that has protected the Republic since its founding. The military's role in democracy is not simply to fight wars, it is to embody discipline, restraint, and fidelity to the rule of law. Its power is immense, but its legitimacy comes from staying outside politics. Petraeus, as a soldier who commanded in Iraq and Afghanistan, knew first and how fragile democracies abroad can be when their militaries are compromised. For him to sound the alarm about America itself was not a casual observation. It was a reminder that the nation's most trusted institution was being tested in ways it had never been before. And so, as we reflect on Petraeus' words, let us recognize that the danger of Trump's purge was not only in the names of those removed or the individuals installed in their place. The true danger lay in the assault on principle, the principle that the military must never serve as the arm of a single politician. That principle is what separates a republic from a regime, a democracy from an autocracy. In defending democracy, the military does not merely protect borders or fight wars overseas, it protects the Constitution itself. And when Petraeus warned that America had never seen anything like this, he was reminding us that the greatest threat may not always come from foreign enemies, but from the corrosion of the very principles that give the republic life. Ladies and gentlemen, if the first truth about Trump's military purge is that it was unprecedented, and the second is that it threatened the sacred neutrality of America's armed forces, then the third truth is this: Donald Trump redefined the criteria for military leadership. Where past presidents valued competence, experience, and independent judgment, Trump valued only one thing: personal loyalty to him. In the words of General Petraeus, there had never been anything like this. Throughout history, American presidents have faced conflicts with generals. Disagreements are natural, they are even healthy. Abraham Lincoln clashed bitterly with General McClellan during the Civil War, frustrated by his hesitation to press the fight. Harry Truman dismissed General Douglas MacArthur during the Korean War, not because MacArthur lacked competence, but because he overstepped civilian authority. Even President Obama faced tensions with General Stanley McChrystal after disparaging remarks emerged in the press. In each of these cases, the disputes centered on judgment, strategy, and the boundaries of authority. The leaders involved may have been dismissed, but their dismissal reinforced the principle that America valued both competence and accountability. Donald Trump's approach was different. His clashes with the military did not center on policy disagreements alone. They centered on loyalty to him personally. For Trump, the question was not, does this general serve the Constitution effectively, but does this general serve me without question? Those who challenged his worldview, contradicted his statements, or acted with independence were often targeted for removal. Those who demonstrated unwavering loyalty, regardless of their competence or qualifications, were elevated. Consider the pattern. Senior defense officials and generals who pushed back against Trump's more controversial directives, from deploying active duty troops against protesters on American streets to withholding security assistance from allies for political leverage, quickly found themselves out of favor. Experienced leaders were dismissed or marginalized, while loyalists, sometimes with far less depth of experience, were placed in positions of authority. This was not the natural ebb and flow of personnel turnover. This was a deliberate reshaping of the Pentagon to reflect not military expertise, but presidential obedience. This dynamic is profoundly dangerous because it strikes at the very heart of what makes the U.S. military strong. Competence, discipline, and professional judgment are not luxuries in military leadership. They are the lifeblood of the institution. Generals are meant to give presidents candid advice, even when it is inconvenient. They are meant to offer the hard truths of war, the logistical realities, the strategic risks. When presidents surround themselves only with loyalists who will echo their words, the entire process of decision-making is corrupted. The military becomes not a tool of defense, but a mirror reflecting the leader's desires. Petraeus understood this distinction well. As a commander, he often delivered difficult assessments to civilian leaders, knowing that candor was essential to success, even when it risked friction. For him, loyalty to the Constitution always outweighed loyalty to any one man. When he looked at Trump's pattern of dismissals and appointments, he saw something far more troubling than mere political disagreements. He saw the erosion of this very principle. And what does this mean for the nation? It means that decisions about war and peace, life and death, could be influenced less by strategy and more by personal loyalty tests. It means that those charged with defending the nation might hesitate to speak truth to power, fearing that their careers would be ended by a single act of defiance. It means that the country's strongest institution could become hollowed out from within, staffed by those chosen not for brilliance, but for obedience. History offers grim warnings. Leaders who value loyalty above competence rarely strengthen their nations. More often, they weaken them. When military leaders are reduced to sycophants, disasters follow, misjudgments go unchallenged, wars are prolonged unnecessarily. Alliances crumble. For a nation like the United States, whose global role depends on the credibility and professionalism of its military, the cost of politicizing leadership cannot be overstated. So when Petraeus sounded the alarm, he was not simply criticizing Trump's style, he was warning of the profound dangers of replacing competence with loyalty. He was reminding America that generals are not meant to be the president's personal bodyguards. They are guardians of the Republic. Their duty is not to flatter power, but to speak truth in its presence. Trump's approach loyalty over competence may have given him comfort in the short term. But for the nation, it raised the most troubling of questions. How long can a democracy endure when its most vital institutions are judged not by their ability to serve the people, but by their willingness to serve one man? To truly measure the scale of Trump's military purge, we must hold it against the long arc of American history. Every president has faced disputes with generals, every commander-in-chief has exercised the authority to hire and fire, and every administration has had its share of tension with the Pentagon. But what distinguishes Trump's actions, what made Petraeus say, "There's never been anything like this," is the motive and the method behind those decisions. Let us revisit history. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln dismissed General George McClellan, not because McClellan opposed him politically, but because McClellan hesitated to pursue decisive battles against the Confederacy. Lincoln needed generals who would fight with urgency to preserve the Union. It was a clash over strategy, not loyalty. Fast forward to the Korean War. President Harry Truman famously relieved General Douglas MacArthur of command in 1951. Why? Because MacArthur publicly defied civilian authority, advocating an expansion of the war into China and contradicting the president's strategy. Truman acted not to protect his ego, but to preserve the constitutional principle of civilian control over the military. His decision was deeply unpopular at the time, yet historians now regard it as an essential defense of democratic governance. More recently, President Barack Obama accepted the resignation of General Stanley McChrystal after a magazine profile revealed disparaging comments by McChrystal's staff about senior civilian leaders. Again, the issue was not loyalty to Obama personally, but respect for the chain of command and civilian oversight. The president could not allow a culture of insubordination to stand, for it would have eroded the principle that the military serves under elected authority. In all these cases, presidents acted within their authority, sometimes controversially, but always grounded in principles of strategy, professionalism, and the preservation of constitutional order. The military's integrity remained intact because competence and accountability, not blind obedience, guided these decisions. Now contrast that with Trump's approach. His dismissals were often not about strategy, but about personal disloyalty. Officials who resisted deploying active duty troops against American protesters, who questioned withholding aid from allies for political leverage, or who refused to echo his claims of election fraud quickly found themselves sidelined or replaced. This was not about enforcing constitutional boundaries, but about demanding personal allegiance. This is why Petraeus warned that America had never seen anything like it. When we compare Trump's actions with past presidents, the break in tradition becomes clear. Where Truman dismissed MacArthur to defend civilian oversight, Trump dismissed officials to undermine it. Where Lincoln replaced McClellan to win the war, Trump replaced professionals to consolidate personal control. Where Obama removed McChrystal to protect respect for civilian leadership, Trump purged leaders precisely because they respected their oaths to the Constitution more than to him. Beyond America's own history, we can also look abroad for cautionary parallels. In countries where leaders demanded personal loyalty from the military, the results have often been tragic. Authoritarians from Latin America to Eastern Europe reshaped their militaries into tools of personal rule. Generals who spoke truth were exiled or jailed. Loyalists were promoted even when unqualified. Eventually, the military ceased to serve the people and instead became a weapon to secure one man's grip on power. America has long prided itself on avoiding that fate. The genius of its system was that the military remained strong precisely because it stayed apolitical. Petraeus, having studied fragile democracies abroad, recognized the warning signs when Trump began treating the Pentagon like his personal guard rather than a national institution. The danger was not immediate collapse, but a steady erosion of trust, integrity, and professionalism. By drawing these historical comparisons, we see why Petraeus' statement was so stark. Trump's purge was not just another disagreement between a president and his generals. It was a departure from centuries of tradition. It was not the routine exercise of presidential authority. It was the bending of authority toward personal ends. It was not leadership in service of the Constitution. It was leadership demanding loyalty to the individual. And so, when Petraeus said, "There's never been anything like this," he was not erasing history, he was clarifying it. Yes, presidents have always clashed with generals. Yes, firings have happened, but never before had the motive so clearly been personal loyalty over constitutional duty. Never before had the purge been so systematically designed to replace professionals with loyalists. That is what makes this chapter in American history unique and dangerous. When General David Petraeus declared that there's never been anything like Trump's military purge. His warning was not just about what had already happened, but about what those actions meant for the future of America. Purges are not abstract exercises in political maneuvering. They carry real consequences. They shake institutions, weaken trust, and create ripple effects that reach far beyond the walls of the Pentagon. To understand why Petraeus was so alarmed, we must examine the fallout of Trump's actions on national security, global alliances, and the health of American democracy itself. The first and most immediate consequence was the erosion of military professionalism. For generations, officers rose through the ranks based on competence, performance, and fidelity to the Constitution. Trump's purge disrupted that tradition by sending a chilling message: loyalty to the president mattered more than expertise. When experienced leaders were dismissed for speaking truth, others took note. If generals feared that candid advice might end their careers, they would be less willing to challenge questionable orders. This silencing effect threatened the very system of checks and balances that ensures military decisions are rooted in strategy rather than politics. Second, the purge undermined civil-military trust. The American people have long viewed their armed forces as one of the nation's most reliable institutions. That trust is grounded in the belief that the military serves the Constitution, not partisan interests. But when the public saw senior officials dismissed for refusing to obey politically motivated directives, such as deploying active duty troops against American citizens during protests, that trust was shaken. If the military became seen as a partisan tool, its moral authority, both at home and abroad, would be gravely weakened. Third, Trump's purge had significant consequences for U.S. national security. Experienced leaders, many with decades of battlefield and policy knowledge, were replaced by individuals chosen for loyalty rather than capability. National security is a domain where misjudgments cost lives. When decisions are made by those lacking the necessary depth of expertise, mistakes multiply. Strategy becomes reactive rather than thoughtful, alliances weaken, and adversaries exploit uncertainty. For Petraeus, a man who commanded forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, this was not a theoretical concern. He knew firsthand how fragile security environments can unravel when leadership falters. Fourth, the Purge strained America's global credibility. Allies who once looked to Washington for steady leadership began to question its reliability. When foreign leaders saw competent officials dismissed for resisting reckless policies, they worried that U.S. commitments could no longer be trusted. NATO partners, for example, were unsettled by Trump's dismissals and his rhetoric that cast doubt on collective defense. Adversaries, on the other hand, watched with interest. Russia, China, and other rivals saw opportunity in the chaos, calculating that a divided America with weakened leadership was less able to project strength abroad. Fifth, the Purge carried dangerous implications for American democracy itself. The military has always been one of the strongest guardians of constitutional order, precisely because it refused to be politicized. But Trump's actions blurred that line. By demanding loyalty to himself, he introduced a precedent that future leaders might exploit. What if another president, emboldened by Trump's example, sought to fill the Pentagon entirely with loyalists? What if dissenting voices were silenced not because they were wrong, but because they refused to serve one man's ambition? In such a scenario, the military would cease to be a stabilizing force and instead become a weapon of authoritarianism. Finally, the Purge left a legacy of deep institutional scars. Repairing trust within the military, between civilian leadership and the Pentagon, and between the military and the American public, will take years. Officers must be reassured that candor will not end their careers. The public must be reminded that the military stands above politics. Allies must see America as steady and dependable once again. None of this repair work will be easy, for once trust is broken, it takes far longer to rebuild than it did to destroy. So, when Petraeus warned that there had never been anything like Trump's purge, he was not merely describing an unusual episode, he was pointing to a chain of consequences that could weaken the very foundations of America's security and democracy. The purge was not just about who sat in the Pentagon in a given year. It was about whether future generations would inherit a military that served the Constitution or one that served the whims of a leader, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is why the consequences of Trump's purge reach far beyond politics. They are consequences that touch the soul of the Republic, and they will echo for years to come. When General David Petraeus said there's never been anything like Trump's military purge, he was not merely describing an event in the past. He was issuing a warning for the present and a call to vigilance for the future. For Petraeus, a man who has spent his life defending the Constitution and studying the fragility of democracies abroad, the purge was not just a personnel shift at the Pentagon. It was a signal that the very foundations of America's civil-military balance were under threat. The question now is, what must America do in response? What is the road ahead? The first lesson Petraeus compels us to see is the importance of remembering the oath. Every service member, from the lowest-ranking recruit to the highest general, swears an oath not to a president, not to a political party, but to the Constitution of the United States. That oath is sacred. It is the firewall that has kept America from falling into the trap of authoritarianism that has consumed so many nations throughout history. Going forward, America must recommit itself to teaching, protecting, and honoring that oath, ensuring that loyalty to the Constitution always outweighs loyalty to any single individual. The second lesson is the need for institutional resilience. Trump's purge showed how quickly norms can be broken when one leader chooses to ignore them. For too long, America assumed its democratic traditions were unbreakable. Petraeus' warning reminds us that they are not. Laws and safeguards must be strengthened so that future presidents cannot so easily dismiss officials for refusing to carry out politically motivated actions. Oversight must be sharpened. Congress, the courts, and the public must all play their part in holding leaders accountable when they blur the line between public service and personal loyalty. The third lesson is the importance of candor in leadership. A strong military does not serve by flattering its commander-in-chief. It serves by providing honest, sometimes uncomfortable truth. Petraeus knew this firsthand. He often had to tell civilian leaders what they did not want to hear about wars that were not going as planned. The health of American democracy depends on this relationship of candor. Moving forward, military leaders must be empowered to speak truth to power without fear of retribution. Silence in the face of reckless orders is not loyalty, it is betrayal of the Constitution. The fourth lesson is the role of the American people. A democracy is only as strong as the vigilance of its citizens. Petraeus' statement was not just a message to generals and politicians, it was a message to every American. The people must demand that their military remain apolitical. They must resist attempts to drag soldiers into partisan battles. They must understand that when the military becomes politicized, the democracy they cherish stands in peril. Civic awareness, public debate, and accountability are not optional. They are essential. The fifth lesson is the need to restore global trust. America's allies watched Trump's purge with alarm, questioning whether the United States could still be counted on as a stable leader of the free world. Restoring that trust requires not only repairing alliances, but also demonstrating that America's institutions are resilient. The world must see that the U.S. military serves the Constitution, not political whims. Only then can America reclaim its standing as a beacon of stability and democracy. Finally, Petraeus' warning points to the enduring truth about democracy itself. It is fragile. It cannot be taken for granted. It must be defended every day, not only against foreign enemies, but against the corrosion of principles from within. Trump's purge revealed that even the strongest democracy can stumble toward authoritarian temptation if vigilance fades. The road ahead demands vigilance, courage, and an unwavering commitment to constitutional order. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us hear Petraeus not as a critic, but as a sentinel. His words remind us that America stands at a crossroads. One path leads toward a future where the military is twisted into a political weapon, where competence is replaced by loyalty, and where democracy withers. The other path leads toward renewal, where institutions are strengthened, where principles are defended, and where the military remains what it has always aspired to be, the guardian of republic, not the servant of a man. There's never been anything like Trump's military purge, Petraeus warned. The question now is whether we, the people, will ensure there never will be again.